Hi guys, I have some tea. Who might be becoming a next creative director of Chanel? Please stay with me. Hi guys, welcome to my channel or welcome back to my channel. My name is Oksana and today I want to chat about who might be potentially becoming a creative director of Chanel. But I'm not going to talk about different names. I want to specifically concentrate on one name only. And before I'm going to dive into this video, I want to do disclaimer that this information, all alleged, it's my personal opinion based on some articles I read over the internet, based on the fashion history, what's happening with the fashion houses, creative directors of fashion houses, and based on the conversation with the say at Chanel. And the essay that I talked to, fairly new essay at the fashion house, and maybe he/she didn't know that she shouldn't reveal such information, not intentionally, because I was just generally chatting with her and ask open-end question of who is going to be a creative director of Chanel. And clearly someone with a little bit more history and work experience at Chanel, because my regular essay wasn't there, maybe wouldn't answer so directly to me, but she answered right away and quite without hesitation directly who going to be a creative director of Chanel. But nevertheless, you know guys, even if they might be potentially saying some information to say that everything could be just, you know, played specifically like that we think that this person going to be creative director, but in fact it's not. And the name that they're talking about will be a creative director of Chanel is Hedi Slimane. So Hedi Slimane, Hedi Slimane definitely in his prime years, he is in prime of his career. And before once again I gonna continue with this story, I wanna make another disclaimer that I'm not a fashion critic. Whatever I'm gonna say here is just my personal opinion. I just love fashion. In fact, I really love Chanel, and my collection of the handbag mostly consists of Chanel, some Hermes, some Louis Vuitton, but it's mostly Chanel handbags. When it comes to even accessory that I wear, mostly it's Chanel. Chanel scarves, Chanel brooches, Chanel earrings, Chanel shoes, Chanel belts, you name it. Chanel ready-to-wear. In fact, from all other fashion houses I might have some ready-to-wears, but the most ready-to-wear I have, if you are talking about like really high-end ready-to-wear, it's Chanel. Though I'm not the person who can afford everything and you know, and more in this life, but whenever I was able to purchase something from Chanel ready-to-wear, I was always purchasing, especially if I like something. Anyway, as I said, rumor says that Hedi Slimane will be the next creative director. But before I'm gonna talk about Hedi and what I think he's gonna bring to the table for Chanel and what might be a little bit danger zone with Hedi representing the house of Chanel, let's talk about who were the creative director of Chanel just before, and it was Virginie Viard. We know that she took a position of creative director of Chanel since 2019 with the passing of Karl Lagerfeld and all the way to 2024. So in the last 5 years, she was creative director of Chanel, producing 10 fashion shows each year. And she received quite critique, you know, when she was creative director of Chanel. To be honest, I loved her from the very beginning. And I would say I was really happy that it was a woman, you know, representing a woman fashion, because we don't really have many females in the fashion world in such a high position as a creative director. So I was applauding her all the way. I love that her fashion is more wearable, though the things that I love, that what she gets the most critique, because people saying that it's boring, it's not a fantasy land like it was with Karl Lagerfeld. But I loved it. I loved it very much, because it's something that I could wear, and it's something that you know, it's in fashion today, and it will be in fashion in another 20, 30, or maybe 100+ years, because it's something solid, something stable, something that represents money, and something that represents a fashion house of such a caliber. And as I said, I love Virginie. I love Virginie from the first her first runway show, let's put it this way. But if you talk about Virginie and Karl Lagerfeld, of course, previously we were always saying all the fashion shows, it was always Karl Lagerfeld, and that's true, because when you create some kind of a fashion show, it's a team of people, but there is a main yes or no behind one person. That one person might be influenced by his colleague or assistants, etc., but at the end of the day, it's his or her decision only if that specific product will go to the line or will not go to the line. So anyway, just a little bit of history. I will grab my glasses for you guys. So Karl started with Chanel in 1983, and they always saying that he started in 1983 and he's all the way to 2019. People forget quite often that he actually left House of Chanel in 1992 to 1997 to Chloe. And again, we are all praising Karl right now after so many years with Chanel, but when he just started with Chanel, it wasn't all, you know, roses and champagne. He got also lots of critique. Not everybody likes what he has to present to the runway, etc. So it wasn't easy for him at the beginning, don't forget that. Before that, and one more thing, when we are talking to Karl and we are always talking about Chanel, we quite often forget that Karl representing Fendi since 1965 to 2019, but we never really speak of him as Karl and Fendi. But he was actually staying with Fendi way longer than he was staying with Chanel. It's once again shows the power of Chanel name. And I'm hoping that, as I said, Hedi, if he's going to become a creative director of Chanel, will do a great job. But I will come what I think going to be, like, you know, his representation of Chanel. But what I'm trying to say, no matter who going to represent a fashion house of Chanel, Chanel name is something that, you know, I think gonna resonate for many, many years to come. And as per today, Chanel, she is the only, one and only female designer that achieved such a level. And as I said, I was really hoping for the Virginie, but it didn't happen. So anyway, so Karl started in 1983. Virginie started with Chanel in 1987 as the embroidery. So she worked in the embroidery department. And she continued with Chanel for 5 more years after Karl. So there is literally 4 years between. So she actually, Virginie even worked for Chanel longer than Karl. Then Karl left Chanel house in 1992 to Chloe. Virginie followed Karl to Chloe, and she worked with him at the Chloe up to 1997. Then in 1997, Carl and Virginie, they came back to Chanel again. Virginie started working as a director of fashion design studio, and then in 2002 she was becoming a director of creation studio. So it means there is a creative director, the person who is behind the creative design of the actual fashion show, the models, etc., and then the creation studio, the director who is actually putting those pieces together, meaning like, you know, the sewing process, like, you know, embroidery process, etc., etc. So since 2000 she was actually doing the pieces, in the meaning of doing it, like, you know, not just like putting on a piece of paper, but actually sewing the pieces, putting these shows together. So she was hand in hand with the Carl, creating all those beautiful shows and creating those unforgettable moments with Chanel. And when it comes to the shows itself, Carl was always praised for the fantasy land or fantasy moods that he was creating with all his shows. And that's absolutely true. When you were looking at, you know, any Carl shows, like, you know, cruise collections, when you're walking literally on a beach and there is ocean waves, you know, inside the building, which is absolute crazy if you think, you know, or his fashion show in supermarket, like that's kind of like really absolutely an obscene show how it was created. Or the fashion show, like, you know, when the rocket shoots to the sky, it's all beautiful. Virginie Viard quite often was criticized for the lack of creativity in her fashion shows, or for the lack of enigma per se in her fashion shows. But to be fair to her, don't forget, she becomes a creative director in 2019, and beginning 2020, COVID hits, and there weren't really physical fashion shows. They were putting fashion shows, but they're all just the films. So where there is a need of creating something spectacular when there is nobody attending, like, you know, when there is nobody actually gonna be present there and watch that spectacular in live. So I still think her shows were really, really beautiful. All of them. I actually loved them all. As I said, there was no enigma, and I have to agree to that. Again, don't forget, because of the COVID, and then you don't know what was the financial situation because of the COVID. Obviously, people saying that sales weren't dropping, but I still believe that sales were dropping because, like, you know, it's hard to sell, especially because with Chanel, they don't have presence on the internet like other fashion houses like Louis Vuitton or Dior or Hermes, when they can sell something over the internet. With Chanel, unless it's a cosmetics and it's in some kind of department stores, you cannot really buy anything from Chanel over the internet. So meaning it still, I believe, affected their financial situations and their sales. And as you know, Chanel is the private company, so they don't really have to disclose their financial situations. So therefore, I think she was also under the stress when she has to kind of produce the show, but keep it in very, very low budget comparing to what was Carl doing, just to kind of justify those sometimes little bit bland looking shows. But I really love the style. I really love the style. I think she truly captured the essence of the women, of women or women in general. Often people are criticizing that she wasn't, like, her show or clothing not sexy enough, but at the end of the day, Chanel was never about sexy. She was always about sophistication. Chanel always said before, like, you know, women shouldn't show their knees, women shouldn't show their toes. Like, you know, she was always about sophistication. She was about imagination, that the man has to imagine how you look under those clothes. It was never about being sexy or looking sexy. But I'm totally digressing if I start talking about Chanel, because I love her so very much. Anyway, so that was the creative directors, and Virginie would start doing bows on the end of the shows with Carl, starting in years actually 2018, and then in 2019 cruise she was already by herself, saying that the Carl was not feeling well, etc. And then obviously she becomes the creative director. So now talking about Hedi and why I think he would be a really good fit for Chanel. So first and most, Hedi is a French man. Chanel is a French man. It's a representation of the French man. By the way, Virginie, she is a French woman as well. And we all know that Carl, he was a German man. And Hedi started his career as in a fashion, like major fashion house in year 2000 at Dior menswear. Then since 2012 to 2016 he was at VIVAIA, and he was always taking a gap between fashion houses. He wasn't like jumping from 2007 also back to VIVAIA after the Dior per se. He was always taking some kind of gap between his switching houses, because he is also actually quite talented photographer. So he's always taking his time before he is making his next move. Right now, Hedi at Celine, and he took Celine after Phoebe Philo. And Phoebe, she was such an iconic person for Celine, so he had like really big shoes to fill when he took Celine house after the Phoebe. And obviously his first collection was also quite criticized. Not everybody likes what he brought, and they said it's exactly YSL, etc. But I believe Hedi always bringing to any fashion house to himself, because if you look at the Hedi, even the way he looks, to me he almost been taken from the era of 70s. Maybe I will include some pictures of the kind of older like fashion of 70s. It's kind of almost like effortless chic, like it's literally looks like he rolled out of the bed, just put pair of trousers, like shirt, maybe some scarf, and he ready to go. It looks like he not even putting any effort into his presence. But of course it's just an illusion. Obviously he truly cares the way he looks, but he's kind of like, you know, all vibe. It's almost kind of rock and roll vibe, and I actually like that very much about him. And any fashion house he's doing and working for any fashion house, he always brings men's collection to that fashion house. For instance, Celine didn't have a men's collection before. Dior men's collection wasn't really present before him as well. I'm sorry. What I'm thinking gonna happen with Hedi and Chanel, if he's gonna be a creative director of Chanel, I think number one, he will bring a men's fashion house to Chanel, and this is a major segment in the fashion and in the financial district, because, like, you know, it's a major money making for any business company. And why? Because nowadays more and more men, they're actually into a fashion, and it's not just simply about like, you know, black suit and a tie. And if you know any guy who loves Chanel, 99% of them, they're buying actually female ready to wear, meaning like, can I even say female, like women, women ready to wear. And it's okay, because if you buy any ready-to-wear from Chanel, you know that they all somewhat designed for more kind of like flat-chested women. I actually have quite often problem with Chanel ready-to-wear because they very snug on the chest. They could be loose on the like waistline, but they're really snug in the chest, because they're mostly kind of designed for flat-chested women, because Chanel herself, she was more flat-chested, and like all these necklaces, etc., like when they're layering, it looks really fantastic on flat-chested women. Anyway, what I'm trying to say with men and Chanel, all they're buying is actually women ready to wear, women collection of the handbags, accessory, brooches, etc. What I think, if Hedi will be creative director of Chanel, he will bring a fantastic collection of men's ready to wear, potentially maybe men's handbags. And not potentially, I think he will bring men's handbags. They will be somewhat, obviously, a representation of Chanel house, but maybe a little bit more in the rigid sense, a little bit more masculine, etc. And what I think could be somewhat, actually, let me grab my Chanel bag. So here is my classic flap, and you know that classic flap was created by Carl, and here we go. I will put it closely right there, and it says Karl Lagerfeld. You know, when Carl passed away, and obviously the classic flap will continue with the fashion house, but this bag no longer has this signature of the Carl, because they were saying that because the Carl no longer there, so Virginie is a creative director of the Chanel, so it shouldn't say Karl Lagerfeld. What I am afraid of, and keep in mind that Virginie doesn't really have that ego. She doesn't have the ego proves that, you know, I'm better than Carl. She was actually continue his legacy. But what I'm trying to say, the signature of the Carl being removed. Now, remember what's happened to Celine. When Hedi Slimane came to Celine, he completely removed design of the handbags that was previously designed by Phoebe, and he brought all his new handbags and obviously everything else. So what I'm afraid of, that maybe Hedi will, though I don't think Chanel will, you know, agree to remove classic flap, because this is milking cow and the minis, etc. This is milking cow for Chanel. But what I'm afraid, because Hedi is a guy, and he's young guy, he's in his prime of the career, he's in his prime of the fashion design, that maybe he will try to be better than Carl, and he is almost going to be insisting that removing anything that might be potentially reminding of Carl, and moving on with his own creation. You don't know, maybe he's already working on some kind of handbags that he wants to bring it forward and saying that it's new it bag for Chanel. We don't know, maybe he's already working on that bag for years, and it's already maybe already been presented to the owners of Chanel, but this is like total speculation. But that's what I'm kind of afraid of. Doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Maybe he gonna bring something even better, because, like, you know, some people saying that this is looks boring, like old lady bag, etc. Because he's young and vibrant, he might bring something totally new and interesting. I know for a fact, I shouldn't say I know for a fact, but what I'm trying to say is that I think his design will be more modern, more kind of shabby chic, more rock and roll, more effortless, not so preppy, let's say. That's what I think. That's what I think. I want to know, guys, what do you think? Do you think it's speculation? Do you think there is a potential of Hedi Slimane of becoming a creative director of Chanel? What do you think other names potentially could be a good choice and good fit for Chanel? So that's about it. Once again, guys, I have to put another disclaimer over here. Whatever I say over here, it's totally my personal opinion. As I said, I read several articles on the internet who might be potentially becoming a creative director of Chanel. There is few other names, but in my humble opinion, that most likely it will be Hedi. And as I said, some rumors and some tea from Chanel employee. So that's about it for today, and I will see you on my next one. Bye bye.